Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast and YouTube video. Today, I've got a very special guest from over the seas in California. I have got Danielle Faris. So welcome, Danielle.
Thank you.
It's
I'm
great.
really looking forward to sharing with the audience today about this concept. It's really one of my deepest passions, and I'm excited to get started.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you on here. It's always great to connect with people, but I love making contact with you and then hearing about what you're doing. So that's fantastic. So what I'll do is I'll introduce Danielle to you, and then Danielle can say a little bit about herself to you as well. So Danielle is a parent-child educator trained in Waldorf physiology and the RIE approach. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. Always having to check on my words with most of the time with myself, so that's good. She has worked in the field with children for the last 17 years and currently focuses on helping families integrate mindful practices into their parenting for a more harmonious and balanced home life. She teaches life mindful parenting classes in her hometown in Northern California, as well as offering digital courses and resources to our communities of families worldwide. So, Danielle, it's once again, it's great to have you on here. So, I wondered if you could just introduce yourself, saying a little bit more, maybe of what I said and how you really got into this area.
Yes, definitely. So I work with parents through my positive mindful coaching practice. It's called the HAP method, and that stands for honor, authenticity, and purpose. And those are the three core values that I believe set the foundation of a successful parent-child relationship. And so I go into detail with families about how to do that. And once the relationship piece is solid, then you can see that trickle down the line into behavioral issues and communication and all of the surface level things going forward. So I think I got into this because I was an only child until I was 11 years old. And I was the first local grandchild on both my grandparents' side. So I was always the oldest, and I had a lot of younger cousins and friends in my life. And I was always the one whose job it was to take care of everyone. And then being 11, when my younger sister was born, I really had an opportunity to have a large role in helping to take care of her. I was in the room when she was born, and I have, a lot of very clear memories of her growth and development through those early years. So I continued after that to have nannying and child care jobs while I was in high school. And I believe all of this just played a role into my decision to formally study early childhood education and development in my undergrad and graduate work.
Awesome. So you got into this parenting role quite early on then, I suppose, at the age of 11, really.
Yes, yeah. And I dabbled in the health and fitness industry a little bit as well, but I always just kept returning to this career path centered around children and families. And I always knew in the back of my mind and in my heart that this was my true calling in life and the contribution that I was meant to make to this world. And so I feel really fortunate that I'm able to do that now.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it sounds like you talked about you dabbled a little bit in but not too much in the health and fitness industry, something I'm very, very keen on, both physical health and the mental health side of it. So that's fantastic. But it sounds like you were very, very clear on what you wanted from a young age, perhaps, and actually you knew what you wanted from that degree. And what you wanted to do after.
Right. Even if I didn't understand it, maybe on a conscious level, like I didn't have it all charted out. I didn't know exactly what my career path would look like. I mean, I volunteered at orphanages and I worked as an assistant in, kindergartens and preschools and daycares. And I had a lot of different roles. I was an academic tutor and I taught, English as a second language to children. So I had a lot of different areas, but I wasn't really clear on exactly my spot until about the last 3 or 4 years ago when I began teaching these parent-child education classes in my local community. And it's just kind of flourished and taken off and grown since there, expanding into the digital platform as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I've been checking out a couple of your courses. They look fascinating. So I don't have any kids to give it to, but you know, there's definitely a lot of good resources to take away there. So that's great. When you mentioned you were looking at helping in an orphanage, which sounds brilliant, a great thing to do, really giving, contributing thing to do. Was there any kind of revelations you got from there from the kids that you perhaps you hadn't picked up anywhere else?
Yeah, there really was. You know, when I first signed up to do this, it was a monthly experience that I was living in San Diego, which is Southern California, right above Mexico. So it was part of my college degree program, and we were going to go down there every month and work with these children in the orphanages. And I thought, you know, oh, they must need our help, like, you know, changing diapers and cleaning and, you know, reading to them and doing all of these things. But when we got there, they just asked us to spend time just holding the infants or playing with the children. And I realized that it's this connection piece that's really what's missing from these children's lives. I mean, they had so many donations as far as clothes and toys and books. You know, they have millions of crayons and coloring books and everything, but they need that connection piece to make it meaningful to them and to actually, you know, learn the information that is trying to be taught with all of these, you know, material goods, right? They need that connection with a primary caregiver or, you know, an adult who cares, and they just don't have the staff capacity at the orphanage to be able to give each child that meaningful connection, you know, time, which is what they asked us to do, is just to connect and bond and play with these kids. And that was really a huge revelation for me. That was really early on in my line of this work.
Yeah, I'm loving what you're saying about the connection piece as well, because I think obviously that completely relates to children and children. As a child, I've experienced it, and I've not known any children who don't want that kind of connection with someone. Obviously, you're a bit closer to working with kids, although I love working with kids. I used to be a teaching assistant as well, actually. So yeah, I really enjoyed that, and connecting with the kids. It's really rewarding. But in adults, we love connections as well. So I love your point about the materialistic things they were getting, but they need that connection, which is even more important. And it's important as obviously as we get older that we don't try and get a connection with someone just for the sake of connection, that we get meaningful connections with the right people as well. So it sounds like you were doing some really rewarding work by trying to fulfill their needs, and that must have felt quite good in terms of that connection.
And I also love, you know, how you're relating it back to the adult piece, because, you know, relationships and connection, they are so important, like you're reminding me in adults, but the foundation is built during these early formative years. So the way that we as adults will show up in relationship, whether it's, you know, friends or with our parents as we're adults, or, you know, intimate relationships, the way that we show up in these relationships is formed in these early years. It's called the formative years, because that's when we're developing the way that, you know, our communication styles and our preferences and coping strategies and self-esteem are all being created in this young age. And so it's all, you know, coming out later as we're adults in how, you know, our relationships go. So we can all kind of do a full circle there.
Yeah, love that. And then sometimes I mean, certainly from my own behavior, but I've researched and did a lot on people who do what's known as self-sabotaging behavior. And they're like, for example, let's use a classic example, perhaps the woman who goes from relationship to relationship, even though she's going into a relationship with a bad guy who's not going to treat her right. And that's because she's got these beliefs formed typically inside of her, and she's not always aware of them. So I absolutely love what you're saying about the connection piece there, and making sure we're on top and helping them as much as possible create those healthy relationships and connection early on.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, not only that does it, you know, help set that foundation, but there's also an element to that we're talking about called co-regulation. And it helps the children develop their emotional intelligence and sense of self in the world by kind of feeding off of their primary caregiver. So if we are dealing with a situation in a calm, collected, mindful, intentional state, that we're actually imprinting that state of being onto the child's nervous system. So there's scientific evidence showing this connection. And the child is going to then be in that calm, collected, mindful state to take on a problem when they see their primary caregiver doing the same. So there's a lot that we can do working within ourselves to make sure that we are approaching situations from a place of intention and clarity, which is going to help benefit the child, even if we're not directly teaching or doing something to the child. Just by being in that state ourselves is going to have a huge impact.
Yeah. That's brilliant. I love how we're both focused on this area of making people feel as good as possible, but particularly your focus is earlier on. I mean, where I look is typically, perhaps they didn't have the best childhood, or perhaps the negative experience have happened, but actually, how do we look at these beliefs and how do we create new ones, new identities, new habits? So that's really valuable work. So my next question really is, the world can be quite a challenging place. It can be a very lovely place as well. There's obviously, I'm not saying it's all negative, but there can be some challenges in life with things coming at us, of course. So what have you found perhaps were particularly helpful habits to embed in children early on when you've worked with them, or try and encourage them? Obviously you can't force them, but
yeah, exactly. So this reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, and it's by the founder of my training philosophy. Her name is Magda Gerber. She's the founder of that RIE approach. And she says, parenting is among one of the most challenging quests that we take on. It's impossible quest, really, because we are parenting children today based on a knowledge of the past in order to prepare them for a future that's unknown. Right? So we don't know what kinds of challenges our children will face in their adult life. We can't predict and foresee 20, 30 years into the future from now. So we don't really know what skills that they're going to need or how to prepare them, right? It's truly unknown. There's new technologies and, pandemics. Who could have predicted this, coming? And we don't really know. So that's why I like to revert back to one of the most timeless and valuable qualities that will thrive in even an unknown future, and that is resiliency. So no matter what the future that our children will live in looks like, no matter what challenges or curveballs they're up against, they can't go wrong with resiliency. The more resilient your child is, the more they'll be able to ride the waves and roll with the punches and come out on top in an unpredictable and ever-changing environment. And parents have the ability to help children build a strong sense of resiliency from very, very early age. And if you're up for it now, I'd love to break this down for you on a very micro layer so that you can see the intricacies of what I'm talking about. If you're ready.
Absolutely. Yes, please. That'd be great.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to use the example of choosing to prop a baby up to a seated position. If you've been around kids or parent, you can help a baby who's not able to sit up yet on their own sit up by arranging the pillows right, or putting them, in a little bouncer or some kind of contraption or device to get them to sit up. It's enjoyable for them to have an upright view of the world, even though they can't get to that position themselves. So like I said, this is a very micro level, so just roll with me here. But as you know, we as parents, for those of you who are parents listening, we can't stand to hear our child fussing or be displeased. We want them to be comfortable and happy. And so propping up a baby often helps them be happier, right? But I want to take a look at the difference between a baby who is propped up and a baby who is not, with that resiliency piece in mind. Okay, so baby number one, who is not regularly propped up to seated, they must go through the natural developmental sequence of first learning how to roll from their back onto one side. And then they're learning how to roll over onto their stomach. And then they're learning how to push themselves up with one arm, okay? And all the while they're strengthening these essential core stabilization muscles and upper body muscles that are needed to physically sustain a sitting up posture in a healthy way. Now, it takes much longer, a matter of several months, to experience what it's like to see the world from upright if you don't prop them up, right? It's going to take them a lot longer. But baby number two, who is propped up with pillows and bouncers and harnesses and stuff, they're not going to have the skeletal structure, the strength in their skeletal structure to appropriately support the weight of their disproportionate sized head, right? And the first child has learned perseverance, body mechanics, the difference between rest versus effort. They've learned the payoff of hard work, and they've often learned some kind of innovation that plays a role in a creative process that they've discovered from their own internal will to get from supine, lying flat on their back, to being able to sit up. They've gone from point A to point B, overcoming setbacks, and through a multitude of failed attempts, they develop resiliency at a deep, deep level here. Whereas if we look at baby number two, they've learned very little, and they're unaware of the months of struggle and milestone achievement that they've missed by being propped up far ahead of schedule from their peers. They often lack the muscle tone and control that did not develop during those critical windows, when instead of going through the natural progression sequence, they were just instead propped up by an adult. Okay, so I could go on and on here, but the key takeaway from this story is don't interfere with nature. Okay, the human body was designed to develop both physical and cognitive elements in a specific sequence, setting the child up to be equipped with the necessary skills to thrive evolutionarily. So when we adults take it upon ourselves to bypass and skip and override these essential linear progressions of development, both physical and cognitive, we are inadvertently interfering with nature, and we're causing gaps in that developmental foundation that is so critical. Okay, so one more quote from Magda Gerber. She says, when a child is ready to do something, they will. I hear a lot of parents coming to me like, when will they be ready, to do this or that? And when will they roll over? When will they crawl? And when they're ready, they will do it. So if a child can't sit up on their own, they're not ready. If they can't walk, they're not ready. I've seen so many people with their 6 to 8 month olds holding their arms up, kind of walking these toddlers that are clearly months behind being able to walk, thinking that they're teaching walking, but really what they're doing is they're overriding and skipping essential foundational developmental steps along the way. Does that make sense?
Oh, it's fascinating. I'm really, really interested. I mean, I don't even have any kids, but it's definitely fascinated me. And it's just that those skills of the key point you made of like resilience and not interfering with nature and then trying to give it to them all, because actually, if we do that, it could impact on their ability when tough things do come their way later in life, perhaps.
Yes, exactly. And that's just one example. There's infinite examples, right? This includes things like, teaching numbers and letters too early to children. So we have a quote that we say at my work, which is, don't do the kindergarten teacher's job for her. So there's a time when the brain is prepped and ready for symbolic associations, which is what letters and numbers are. They're symbolic representations of something. And earlier than kindergarten is not that time, right? But there's so many, 2 and 3 year olds, at least in our culture here in the US, who have to know the alphabet and be able to count to 50, things like that. But anytime we try to rush or expedite or force or coax a child to do something that they're not ready for, it doesn't mean they're not capable of memorizing a bunch of numbers and letters, but it's not meaningful to them. You're not actually teaching it in a meaningful way if you're doing it before their physical brain is developmentally at the time when they can learn symbolic representation.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I was fascinated by your story and the examples. It was a really good example, actually, that you could, you could have the right intention to help someone. as a young age, and we all have a different styles, but the key thing I picked out, and it's definitely something that's really, really helped me through life, is the resilience as well. And I've got like family members who've been very strong in that as well, fortunately. But yeah, no, that's brilliant. The kind of next question I had is, say we talked about some of these things we encourage our kids to do, or kind of don't force them to do, but it's about maybe helping them develop certain skills. But if you see a kid struggling with self-esteem, perhaps is a bit older than that age, how would you approach that?
Yeah, so I have about three key topics here that I cover in my programs that I'll share with you now that I recommend to parents to help encourage self-esteem in children. Is that what you're asking? A little bit older than the infant, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and you know, usually none of these three things that I'm going to recommend are what typically first come to people's minds. And we don't have time to cover all of these three areas in detail, but I want to give you just a general overview of each so you have an initial good understanding. The first one is the nature of our physical contact with children. So how we touch and hold, you know, babies, toddlers, and children from the very beginning, it sends a message about their worth and value that they hold of themselves in the world. So when we can use respectful practices like asking children before we pick them up or wipe their nose or brush their hair, before doing these behaviors to them, we can set a tone that their preferences, their choices, their values, that those things matter in the world. And that is really huge with all children, as well as being mindful and respectful to the degree in which we force them to be affectionate to others. We have that a lot here. And, you know, you need to give grandma a hug, or you need to give Aunt Kitty a kiss, or things like that. And, you know, forcing children to display physical affection when inside they're saying, I'm not ready for this, this makes me feel uncomfortable, is not beneficial to either the relationship that the parent holds with that child and then their overall development of self-worth and self-esteem.
Yeah, could I just jump in on
that
quickly? Because that's a really interesting point. And often, and it's certainly the case for me, and it's generally a case for a lot of people, is people have this feelings of, I am not enough, is usually the root cause of their self-esteem. And I suppose a lot of what people do struggle with self-esteem is look for that external validation that's absent from their own self-worth and their self-love. They look for this external validation from other people to get their approval. So is that a little bit of what you're saying in terms of not trying to give their grandma or their aunties a kiss to kind of be good?
Yes, that is actually huge. And it ties perfectly into the second one, which is similar to, you know, the physical piece, but that's about the language that we use to speak to and about our children. I'm so sorry. Sorry, I don't know how that happened. So it's about the language that we use to speak to our children, and that's something like, you know, saying good job all the time. So that's where you're speaking about looking for that external validation. Really, is every time you do something, do you need to hear, was that a good job? Did I do good? You know, was that right? That's kind of reading that into them. If we're constantly following them around and commenting, good job, good job, good job to everything that they're doing, that's a judgment that we are passing on to the child. We're saying, we judge this behavior as good. We judge, you know, your ability to color in the lines as good. We judge you sharing that toy with your, you know, cousin as good. And it sets up a dichotomy of, you know, good versus bad. And then the child, you know, can reflect inwardly like, well, what if I hadn't shared the toy? What if I didn't color in the lines? Does that make me bad? You know, so we do take a really deep look at the language that we use, and avoiding, you know, we call it the good job rut, is huge because it's so ingrained in our parenting culture, at least here in the US. And yet there's enormous scientific brain research showing that it's a relatively meaningless phrase to both adults and children. And when children are applauded for doing just performing basic, expectations of family life, or applauded for using the potty, right? Or applauded for learning to use a spoon. These are just natural developments, and they have this intrinsic motivation to want to grow and develop and learn and integrate into society. And when we're, clapping for them that they're doing it, it can feel patronizing and they can feel embarrassed. It hurts their self-esteem, and it can decrease their ability to develop that intrinsic motivation to do these things.
Yeah, really. Yeah, it's really. I'm so glad I've connected with you. It's just, this is all fascinating stuff, and it just reminds me of something I read in the book. I'm usually very sharp on my books and like where something came from, but I do remember reading that when you, like, a kid does a good drawing, for example, and then they take it home, and then their mum says, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. You've done a great drawing." Instead, they were saying it's better to say, "That is a great drawing, but I love you because of you, not because of the drawing." And those I suppose are those really clear little differences. Love them because they're enough already, rather than them thinking, "Oh, I have to do a good drawing to be loved."
Right. Yes, exactly. And, going back to that drawing example, you can say, you did this picture. How do you feel about it? Sometimes I've had that example that you're mentioning. The kid brings it home and the mom says, "Oh, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful drawing." And, they say, "Oh, well, this is my representation of, a bad dream I had when I got in a bike crash. This is what it was." So you don't want to assume and judge and say everything is great and wonderful all the time. We want to be authentic and receptive to what it is for them. Like, children work through painful emotions and difficult emotions through art and play a lot of times. So if everything is always, beautiful and great and wonderful, that's not really giving them an authentic chance to work through some struggles. And maybe drawing a picture of a painful experience they had is their way of processing that emotion. And so we don't want to jump in and say, "This looks great. Like, what is this, a flower?" Like, "No, this is blood from when I cut my knee, and I fell," something like that.
Yeah, love that. So that was the second part, was it? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then the third part is about play. So I want to share another quote with you from an account I really like on Instagram called Sweet Home Montessori.
Oh, we love quotes here.
Yeah. She says, "When you cut it for me, write it for me, open it for me, set it up for me, draw it for me, or find it for me, all I learn is that you do it better than me." So we think that we're helping our children and being good parents by catering to their every need. And, "Oh, they want this toy out of the box. Let me open the package and give them the toy," right? Or they want juice, so let me, get the cup and the juice and pour it. They want the juice. But really, it's more about honoring the process. Like, they're trying to learn about the world. They want to learn how to open a package, how to get a cup, from the counter and the juice out of the refrigerator. There's more to it than just the outcome. So by letting children do things for themselves and valuing the process versus the outcome, we can really provide a lot of, resources and education in the way of letting them go through the motions versus doing everything for them. And so playing with children in a way that is self-directed on their part, it's child-led, and it's uninterrupted whenever possible, is one of the most effective and impactful ways that we can genuinely boost our child's self-esteem. So not constantly entertaining them. It's not us, building the Lego castle while they watch. It's not us saying, "Okay, like, let's play hide and seek. You go there, you do that, you do this." We're not the ones orchestrating the whole play, even though it's easy to fall into that role. And we think, we're connecting and having fun with a child. And of course, there's a time and a place for that. But being mindful of it and making sure that there's also a time and a place for the child to be the screenwriter and the director and the producer of the play with you. And you're the one following, letting the child lead. That's important for that self-esteem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And yeah, play definitely is something even as adults we should encourage ourselves to do. So
Yes.
I really agree with what you're saying on helping encourage them play. We often forget it as we sort of go through life, but absolutely, that makes total sense. So kind of one last question really.
Yeah.
So obviously you do a lot of work, and it sounds like obviously there's a parents, and I'm not going to pretend I know what it's like to be a parent, but it sounds like there's a fair few things to think about. So my complete admiration to yourself and all parents out there, especially to mine, who are fantastic, wonderful parents I've got. But yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of different factors. So there's quite a lot of people out there, and people who listen to this podcast. So you might be listening now, and you might be listening now and hearing this thinking, okay, my childhood wasn't the best, and perhaps it could have been better, but I've got a struggle with my self-esteem now. So how I kind of talk about this a lot. What would you is there any kind of key tips you would recommend for someone who perhaps had that struggling childhood, and how they can look after their self-esteem now or improve it?
Yeah, so I mean, as with anything, I would say kind of just bringing this newfound awareness to how our self-esteem is developed should help gain some perspective, right? Everything that we've been talking about so far up until this point, once we can kind of understand the soil that we're planted in, we can then choose which parts of our past are beneficial to helping us further grow and flourish in the future, and then which parts we can let go of. So if you can identify with some of these things I've been talking about in your own childhood with your own parents, we can do a lot to make conscious decisions about letting go of that's not serving us going forward. So we do a lot of very intentional but gentle emotional release work in my programs with parents to help clear generational cycles of parenting that include low self-esteem. And, I would say keep listening to your podcast here, maybe make a gratitude journal, kind of adopt an abundance mindset, but really just, this knowledge that this is how self-esteem is developed should take a lot off your shoulders. I hope that it's not a problem with you. It's not your fault. This is just ingrained in our culture that we're taught to speak to and teach children in this way that's very top-down approach, and gives the child very little opportunities for developing that genuine sense of self-esteem, unless it's done really intentionally by someone who has this knowledge.
Yeah, totally. And the awareness factor is absolutely key. And me and myself and Danielle were talking before the show, and actually it might be a new podcast for you if you're listening now. And I was actually sharing my story of when I was 2.5 and I lost the baby brother, but I was kind of with family, friends, and various things like that. And actually it created this belief within me, even though I've got an amazing, wonderful family, of just those memories and thinking, am I not lovable? Am I not enough? What's wrong with me? What have I done wrong? And then I got lost a couple of times as a kid, and various things like that. And just those beliefs formed in my head, but actually creating that awareness really helped me, because then I was able to, and I won't go into it this episode, but we have other episodes when I talk about these beliefs and incantations, a Tony Robbins method of really embedding this new identity and these beliefs into yourself. But actually that awareness and understanding those beliefs that might have been created through childhood is a really good starting point, because then that helps us to identify, okay, where did that come from, and actually what do we want to believe, and why is that not serving us anymore? How can we go forward? So I love that point about awareness. Absolutely. So that's great.
Exactly. Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself there. Perfect. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Danielle, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on the show, and you've given so much value. So I'm so grateful that we made contact, and I've learned an awful lot today, and I'm sure everyone listening has learned an awful lot to this today. So just in case people want to find more of you, which I'm sure people will, because it's fascinating stuff, where's the best place to find you in terms of website and social media and various sources?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, the HAP method. That's the name of my coaching practice. And again, it stands for Honor, Authenticity, and Purpose, HAP. And social media, I have a free Facebook group you can join called Patient Connected Parents. And then my website is thehapmethod.com. I offer programs at both ends of the price range spectrum because I don't want anyone to not be able to access this information that I feel is so important. And so if this type of work, if what we're talking about, if that interests you and you want to learn more, regardless of your pocketbook, there's a place for you in this community. And you can start by joining that Facebook group, connecting with me. I'm in there all the time, posting checklists and worksheets and ebooks and answering questions, and really connecting with the members in that group who aspire to this philosophy and really want to raise their children in this mindful and intentional way.
Awesome. That sounds great. And I'll be linking all this in the description of the episode as well, so people can directly link themselves to there. So some great resources we've got there. Once again, Danielle, thank you so much for coming on today, and it's been great talking to you.
You as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Right, and I will catch everyone in the next episode.